Hey, everybody. I am super excited to bring you my interview with Ellen Langer. If any person on the planet can prove that aging is in your mind, I would say it's Dr. Langer. She is a Harvard professor and researcher. For 40 years, she has been studying the effects of influencing the mind to change our physical bodies and our experience of life. You don't want to miss this interview. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this wonderful episode of Next Level Healing. I'm your host, Dr. Tara Perry. My guest today is the incomparable Dr. Ellen Langer. Her work is regularly referenced by leading transformational experts around the globe. For over 40 years, Harvard professor researcher Dr. Langer has been a leading pioneer on the effects of our mind on our body and life experience. She very cleverly, measurably demonstrates how mindlessness in everyday situations occurring in places such as nursing homes, schools, and businesses is very common and very costly. She conversely proves how mindfulness, this simple non-meditation, not mindfulness, results in improved health, well-being, and better relationships. Welcome, Dr. Langer. I am so thrilled to be talking to you.
Thank you very much, Tara.
So I'm really curious because for so long, we've been very trained to believe that the person in the white coat had all the answers. What was it in your life that triggered you to realize, wow, maybe there's more to this. Maybe our minds have a huge effect on our well-being, and go and invest all this time and energy into studying these effects?
There's so many things. I don't know where to begin. My new book, The Mindful Body, was at first written to be a memoir. So I recalled all of the stories you're asking me about. And then it became what it is, which is a book very similar to mindfulness, but with fun stories in it. One of the stories I tell is that I was at this horse event, and this man asked me if I'd watch his horse while he went to get his horse a hot dog. Well, I've always been a straight A student, so I know that's ridiculous. Horses don't eat meat. He came back with the hot dog, and the horse ate it. And that's when I realized everything I think I know could be wrong, which to me was a wonderful thing because it opened up all sorts of possibilities. So then I started to think about how we know what we know. And much of the information comes from science. But what people don't realize is science gives us only probabilities. If you do a study and you replicate the study, what you're going to find, if the study is significant, is that you're probably going to get the same results. If you do the exact same thing, which we can never do, you may get the same results. That is translated as absolutes. Not many horses under these circumstances don't eat meat, but horses don't eat meat. I had this other experience that it didn't make me think. I was, very young. And so it didn't lead me to question all the things that you're asking about, but it's a fun story and speaks to the same issues. So I was married when I was very young. You'll have to read the book to know just how. Well, actually, I was 19, going on 40. And so we went to Paris for our honeymoon, and we went into this restaurant, and I ordered the mixed grill. On the mixed grill was pancreas. Now, it's not clear to me why, but I felt that now that I was all grown up, a married woman, I had to eat the pancreas. And so the first thing I did was to ask my then husband, which of these things was the pancreas. He pointed to something. I ate everything else, and now came the moment of truth. Could I eat it? I start to eat it, and I literally get sick. He starts laughing. I say, "Why are you laughing?" He said, "Because that's chicken. You ate the pancreas a while ago." Okay, and I love chicken. Okay, so just by thinking it was pancreas, I got sick. So we can talk ourselves into being sick. And more important, in many ways, we can talk ourselves out of being sick. So
I love it.
You mentioned, that all of the work I've done over 45 years has shown that mindlessness is pervasive. The problem is that when you're mindless, you're not there to know you're not there. All right. So nobody realizes how mindless they are. But every time you're sure of something, you're being mindless. Basically, because everything is always changing, Everything looks different from different perspectives, so we can't know. Another one, I probably have used this too often. Maybe this will be the last podcast on which I say it. But the thing everybody knows for sure is when you ask them, so Tara, how much is 1 + 1?
I love this in your book. I love this. And
Okay.
we, of course, it's 2. We all know that.
That's right. And so if I asked you the question, you'd probably groan, look away. You'd pay no attention to me any longer because it's so clearly 2. But it's not always 2. Interestingly, the other day I asked Chat GPT 4 or 5, whatever number, how much is 1 + 1? And it said 2. And I said, well, what else could it be? And it said 1 + 1 is 2. It just kept repeating it because artificial intelligence is based on human intelligence. Okay, so all of the data it's dealing with are the data that we've given it over time. Anyway, if you add 1 pile of sand plus 1 pile of sand, 1 + 1 is 1. You add 1 cloud plus 1 cloud, 1 + 1 is 1. You add 1 wad of chewing gum plus 1 wad of chewing gum. Okay, so in the real world, it doesn't equal 2 as often as it does. All right, now
and it's all fiction anyway, because you mentioned in base 2, which I never thought of,
right.
that 1 + 1 is 10, I think, or 11 or something.
Right. Thank you. I forgot. I should add that to when I give the 1 + 1 example. But the point is, once you now know that 1 + 1 sometimes equals 2, sometimes equals 1, then, and if you're using the base 2 number system, then 1 + 1 equals, as written, is 10. Now, if somebody should come up to you and ask you how much is 1 + 1, you wouldn't blurt out 2. You wouldn't cast aspersions at why are they asking you such a stupid question. You'd pay attention to the context. Right?
So much of your research so beautifully reflects that Roger Bannister concept that once we see that, it necessarily isn't this way, we can see our world and function in our world differently. And that's, I mean, this genius has been throughout your work your whole entire life, which is just so thrilling.
Thank you.
Hey guys, studies are showing that 68% of people that watch podcasts regularly don't click the subscribe button. Do me a huge favor. If you like this content, click subscribe so other people know where to go for the cool stuff. Thank you.
I'd love to just tell our listeners that may not be familiar with your work about your famous counterclockwise study, just really briefly, where you took 2 groups of men. Yeah.
You want to tell them, or you want me to tell them?
Well, you took men who were older and had them go back 20 years in time.
I'm going to.
Okay.
All right, and it's my study. I get to share it.
Go for it.
Many people know the study now because if you tune in to The Simpsons Go to Havana, they actually describe the study. But here was the first test of the notion of mind-body unity. And so this was the big insight for me. Mind and body, these are just words. What does it mean? And as long as we saw them as separate, then you had the problem, how do you get from a thought, something immaterial, to the body, something material? And I said, wait a second, let's just put them back together again. See the person as one whole. Then wherever you're putting the person, you're putting the whole person, the mind, the body, feet, everything, right? And so in this first test of the mind-body unity, we retrofitted a retreat to 20 years earlier and had elderly men live there as if they were their younger selves. So they were talking about past events as if they were just unfolding. Everything was designed for the past to be now the present. All right. And a comparison group for whom the past was the past. And in a period of time as short as 1 week, what we found was their vision improved, their hearing improved, their memory, their strength, and they looked noticeably younger. And all of that happened without any medical intervention. And so I talk about that study in the new book, The Mindful Body, but also all of the research we've done since then. I think the findings are interesting and speak volumes to the control we have over our health. One of these studies, let me go on. I should let you talk.
Please, no, keep going. I don't want to interrupt you.
I was just going to give an example of one of the studies. I'll give you the most recent that I did with my graduate student, Peter Ungle. So we inflict a wound, not a big wound, but, because we're not sadists, but a wound nonetheless. And people are in front of a clock. Unbeknownst to them, the clock is going twice as fast as real time, half as fast as real time, or real time. Now, prior to this work, nobody would believe what you perceive as a passage of time would have anything to do with healing. But in fact, what we found was that the wound healed based on clock time, your thoughts about what time it was, rather than real time.
I love that. That's another genius experiment. Has that been published?
Yes.
That's fantastic. Wow. I also love your study with the one with the hotel room attendants.
Yeah, everybody.
Yeah, I mean, that was brilliant. Yeah. I mean, because here, please tell that story.
Okay. Well, this is really a test of mind-body unity, but also of a nocebo. Everybody knows what a placebo is, right? You take something, you think it's going to work, and it works. It makes you healthier. The nocebo is where you think it's not going to work, or you don't have thoughts about it working, even though it should work and it doesn't work. So that'll become clear in a moment. So what we did with these chambermaids is first we asked them, how much exercise do you get? Oddly, since their work is exercising all day long, they don't see themselves as getting exercise because the Surgeon General says exercise is what you do after work, and after work they're just too tired. All right. So we divide them into two groups, very simple study, and we teach one of the groups that their work is exercise. Making a bed is like working on this machine at the gym, doing the windows, other machine at the gym, and so on. And so what we find is, they believe now that their work is exercise. That's all we've trained them to see. They don't think they're working any harder. The measures we have say they're not working any harder. They're not eating any differently from the group that doesn't see their work as exercise. Nevertheless, with the simple change in mindset, they lost weight. There was a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down. Now, so
in just 4 weeks, that's incredible.
So the way it's a nocebo is that the positive effects of exercise are not going to present themselves if you don't see yourself as exercising.
Amazing. So another thing that I think influenced you early on, you mentioned in your book when your mother passed away, you kind of lost faith in standard medicine. Can you touch on that and how that shaped your...
It was really before that, that she had breast cancer, and the cancer had metastasized to her pancreas. And that's the end game, right? That there's no way that they can bring you back from that and so on. And so, for example, they didn't exercise her limbs or anything because everybody expected her to die. And then magically, the cancer was gone. And there was no way for them to explain it. And the mind-body unity idea does explain it. And now, of course, she was able to leave the hospital, but she had to leave in a wheelchair because, her limbs now were no longer useful. So that suggested to me again that they think they know, they don't know. This idea of spontaneous remissions is very interesting to me. Imagine you go home from the hospital, because most people want to die at home, and all of a sudden you get better. I don't think your first thought is, let me call my doctor and tell him he was wrong. So most spontaneous remissions are not going to ever be recorded. You have all those people who don't like hospitals, don't go to doctors in the first place, who might have tumors. They might have tumors that they know about. They might have tumors that they don't even know about. And the tumor might go away. We just don't know how likely it is. But I think if people believe that it's possible, you orient yourself differently. And, lots of people call me who are given these dread diagnoses and told they have, let's say, 6 months to live, which, from what I've already told you about medical science, which is true for all science, we don't know. They have no right, in some sense, telling people this. But the first thing that I say is that if I were told I have 3 months to live, I wouldn't waste my time being angry, depressed. First thing I'd do is I'd go have a hot fudge sundae, and I would double up on my living. And interestingly, by doing that, you're more likely to beat whatever it is you have. 45 years of research has shown when you're mindful, which we haven't really defined, it's a simple process of actively noticing. You're actively noticing the neurons are firing, and the research shows that it's literally and figuratively enlivening. So when you think you're dying, you turn the world off, you become more mindless. And that's why the idea that maybe, you don't have to, if you're given these diagnoses, do this in order to beat the system. You want to do it because when you're actively noticing is when you're your happiest, when you're living fully. And it just happens to have a very positive side effect.
What you're saying is so near and dear to my heart. I had a patient years ago that came in with stage 4 throat cancer. Fortunately, he asked me the magic words, which are, which would you do? Because I'm not allowed to treat cancer, but I can tell him what I would do. And I said, the anger and resentment that you're holding on to, let it go yesterday. And in my experience, I just seen people that had done vegetable juicing for a series of weeks, did very well. He did exactly what I said, and in 5 weeks he was cancer-free. His doctors didn't even ask him what he did, even though they screamed at him that if he didn't do all of his chemotherapy, which was not looking well for him, he looked pretty bad after 4 rounds, and he was supposed to endure 14. Unfortunately, he made the choice.
That's beautiful. Lots of people
so
are...
I love what you're doing, and these people just drop off the map. They don't get recorded. Their stories aren't told, and they don't get into the calculations of these things.
Well, people are spending a lot of time trying to increase the number of years they live. And I think rather than increasing the number of years, you want to increase the life you're living. And by doing that, then you're probably going to add more years to your life.
Talk about that research. You said that we're learning more about this. How do we know that by, I know Candace Pert talked about the molecules of emotion and how, when we release positive molecules in our brain, there's physiological improvements.
No, I have, the first study I did was back in the early 70s. We went into nursing homes and we made the residents in nursing homes more mindful, although I didn't call it mindfulness at the time. So they were making choices, engaging their environments. And 18 months later, we found out they had lived longer. And we replicated that in a couple of other studies. So and
this was something so simple like taking care of a houseplant, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting because if we put all that we've said so far together, if you think you know, you don't pay any attention. Once you realize you don't know, you sit up and pay attention. And that uncertainty that people are afraid of, they should embrace, because there's enormous power in uncertainty. Certainty is mindless. It's sort of, if you're trying to accomplish something, it's the trying, it's the mastering that's exciting. Once you've mastered it, it becomes a non-event, and so people shouldn't be so afraid of not knowing. But I think everybody will accept that they don't know, not run from not knowing, as soon as they recognize that no one knows. So right now, as I'm sure you know, and you've spoken to your clients about it, that people step away because they're afraid, that they don't know. They're afraid somebody is going to think they're stupid or whatever. And once you realize that the person you're afraid of also doesn't know, then you take on a different way of presenting yourself to the world and to yourself. What people need to be, I believe, is confident but uncertain. Usually confidence is correlated with certainty. 1 and 1 is 2. I'm sure of it. Well, you're wrong, and so I think it's also interesting. Women in the past have used more conditional language. Could be, it seems that, maybe, perhaps, which are all very mindfulness-inducing. But people were taken to task as if you're sitting on the fence, and you want to be on the fence. Yeah, you want to make a decision, but you don't want to presume that it's necessarily the right decision.
Again, you're just speaking to my heart. I'm so excited that you're on this path, and you're. If you had a megaphone and could just tell the whole world something for 5 minutes, what would you like to tell them?
I guess the first thing I would tell them is they have far more control over their health and well-being than people realize. I do this thing in my class, a health class at Harvard, and I'll say to people, how far is it humanly possible to run? So these are Harvard kids. They know a marathon is 26 miles. They figure it's got to be more than 26. Then it becomes like an auction, 30, 35, and they never go past 50. Always, the person who yells at 50 is met with groans from everybody else. Okay. Right after that, I put on a video, YouTube, of the Tarahumara, which is a tribe in Copper Canyon, Mexico. And these people can run 200 miles. And I think by analogy, the difference between 26 and 200 doesn't even approximate the difference, I believe, between what we think we can do and what in fact we can do. And we have lots of well-meaning, I have enormous respect for my colleagues, but I believe that as a rule, the research takes you from not so good to better. And there's a whole other way of being that I call better than better. And that, as soon as you achieve something, you think, well, that's as good as it gets. And I say, no, it gets much better. So I'll give you an example of the better than better. I was asked to give a sermon years ago, which for me was bizarre since I'm not religious. And I said yes, because I tend to say yes to everything. All right, so now what am I going to talk about? I started thinking about it since I know very little about religion. Forgiveness sounds sort of religious-like. I could get away with that. And I started thinking about forgiveness, and I came up with something that is actually sacrilegious, I think. So if you ask 10 people, is forgiveness good or bad, what are they going to tell you? It's good.
It's good.
If you ask 10 people, is blame good or bad, what are they going to tell you? It's
bad.
But you can't forgive unless you blame. Forgivers are our blamers. And do you blame people for good things or bad things? Well, you blame people for bad things, but things in and of themselves are neither good nor bad. It depends on how you frame them. So we have the people who see the world negatively, who blame, and then forgive. To my mind, hardly divine. Right? The alternative is, so basically, if you blame, you're better off forgiving, than not forgiving. But there's a whole other way to be in this world, which is to understand a very simple idea that goes counter to the way most people live their lives. And this is, to me, Tara, of all the things that I've done, the thing that is most important. Behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else he or she wouldn't do it. No one wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be mean, obnoxious, and clumsy. So when they're being that way, what is happening from their perspective? Remember, when we're mindless, we only see the world from one perspective. But anything can be explained in multiple ways, and that would be if you are mindful. So, for example, as I said a moment before, or I can say I say yes to everything because I'm very gullible. And so let's say you're going to help me because you're now my therapist. Tara, please help me. I don't want to be gullible. And so probably what most therapists would do would be to tell me, it's not so terrible being gullible. So they'd want me to accept that I'm gullible. All right. And then possibly work with me not to be gullible. The mindful solution is to ask, what is being gullible from the actor's perspective? Well, it turns out it's being trusting. The reason I can't stop being gullible is because I value being trusting. You, by the way, are so inconsistent it drives me crazy. That's because from your perspective, you're flexible. It turns out that each and every negative description of our or somebody else's behavior has an equally strong but oppositely valenced alternative. For every negative, there's a positive. People do things for good reasons or else they wouldn't do it. All right. And so if you embrace this, then you recognize that all judgments are negative. Now what people are taught is to feel yeah, she's clumsy, but, that's okay. We're going to accept her for her clumsiness. All right. Rather than turn it around. We're going to accept you for being inconsistent, me for being gullible, and so on. All right. Yeah. So mindfulness makes an enormous difference in relationships, because now, if I want to get you to stop being inconsistent, what I have to do is get you to stop valuing being flexible. And probably what will happen is it won't even come up, because now that I realize it's because you're flexible, and I value also you being flexible, now I can embrace you instead of trying to change you.
I love it. I love it, because the power of changing our framework is just immense. How many books have you written? Which one captures what you just described, this changing of framework? I mean, I love Counterclockwise, and I love every, piece of research that you have in there.
There are about 13 books. But the most recent, because this was, as I said, started out as a memoir, goes over lots of the important things that I've said before, and then all the new thoughts about decision making, these new mind-body tests, lots of, with fun stories, So I had this adventure, we'll call it an adventure after the fact. It was terrifying before the fact, or while the fact was unfolding, with Hell's Angels. And I'm not going to ruin that, give you the punchline, but I use the story as a way of teaching people a very different view of risk-taking and decision-making that most people now subscribe to. After the fact, it's very easy to say you shouldn't have done it. So what I do is I go through the different steps in that adventure. I say, what would you do? Before they know what I did. And then you see, gee, it's not so straightforward. So again, when people do things where the consequences seem to be negative, and then we diminish them, thinking that, well, how could you be so stupid as to not know? Again, all of this is a part of our being mindless. Risk-taking is, it's an interesting thing. Much of what we understand about other people is from the observer perspective, as the one I just said. You see me as gullible or impulsive. From my perspective, I may be oblivious to my perspective, but I'm being spontaneous and trusting. That nobody takes risks. From their perspective, they do what they do because it makes sense. No matter what anybody tells you, I can't believe somebody is buying stocks saying, oh, well, maybe it'll go up, maybe it'll go down. No, you buy it at that moment because you think it's going to go up price. All right. Mm-hmm. Then later, when somebody asks you about it, then you start to hedge. So risk-taking is really an observer phenomenon. So if you were driving in my car with me, and I take a turn at 80 miles an hour, okay, you're gasping and thinking to yourself, my gosh, what a risk taker she is. And all it really means is that my perception of my ability is greater than your perception of your ability in that situation. Right? So if you were driving with Mario Andretti, I don't even know if that name means anything to people, because some of my examples, I'm getting old.
I recognize it.
from the distant day, but he was a race car driver. So yeah. Surely when he takes the turn at 80 miles an hour, he's not taking a risk. He knows how to do it. So the example I might use is if Greg Louganis, so he's a famous swimmer, diver, right? Now, if there's, he's up on the top of a mountain and there's, this water below, and when he dives into that water, he's not taking a risk. If I were to do it, well, I would never do it. So I'd say, gee, but the difference is his ability. So what does that mean? That means when you admire somebody for being able to do something that you can't do, rather than give yourself a pep talk, you can do it, just, suck it in. And what you need to do is learn the skill. So if I want to be able to take those turns, without risking anything, I learn how to drive better. I want to dive into a small pond, whatever. I learn to swim better. If Greg Louganis were asked to take a psychology test, where it's he's going to, let's say, cost him $100,000 to take the test, but if he wins or does well, he gets $1 million. That's 10 to 1. That's that's a lot of money, but he's not going to do it. I would do it, not because I'm a risk taker, because I know the material. All right. So, you have lots of people. You can do it. You can do it. And all I'm saying is learn how to do it. And then, of course, you can do it.
While we're on the sports analogy, you do so much about talking about old age homes and how they're just bereft of people being able to take control over their lives, and so you mentioned how two tennis players would have two totally different ways of doing it based on their height and their grip, and how we can just basically design the world to be more accommodating for older people.
Yeah. Or for any of us. So you're mixing the examples in a very clever way, Tara. So the example of the tennis, if I'm lecturing in person, and I'll ask, I'll look and see, is there anybody very tall out there? And for some reason, there's always a guy who's about 6'5", and I'll ask him to come to the stage. So here I am at 5'3", and he's 6'5". We look silly together. I ask him to put his hand up. I put my hand next to it. His hand is 3 inches larger. And then I just raise the question, should we do anything physical the same way? To me, no. So the point is, the more dissimilar you are from the person who created the rules, the more important it is for you to deviate from those rules. If I play tennis, hold the racket, move my body exactly the way he does, and he's much more similar to the people who came up with the rules, I'm never going to do it as well as I could possibly do it. People need to understand that virtually everything is mutable. We walk into a room and we sort of act like everything is there for a good reason, and so you don't go and change it. And I did this from the very beginning. I mean, when I gave my first talk, I walked into an auditorium, and the stage was here and the chairs were, all the way back there, and I knew that was going to make me nervous. So the first thing I did was move all the chairs forward. Most people wouldn't. Now, if you say to somebody, can you move the chairs? Everybody's going to say yes. But the point of mindlessness is these things just don't occur to us. So every time something doesn't work for you, it's an opportunity to create something new for yourself, for other people. And this is the case not just for physical things, but for everything that we're doing. I do this other thing in class. A friend of mine was the person who created the first gay pride parade in Boston. And so I draw a little map on the board, and I say, okay, she starts down here, and this is the route the parade takes. Okay, tell me why. Now, after the fact, people come up with wonderful reasons. Maximum viewing, maximum safety, maximum, The fact of the matter was, she was down here, had a present to give a friend of hers who was all the way over here, and that was the reason that the route was chosen. You see what I'm saying? So that no matter the example I also use a lot back to tennis, and then we'll go to old age, is I'm a medium intermediate player. However, tennis player. If I ruled the world, which I'm still trying to do, I'm not getting very far, but I'm still. You'd instead of 2 serves, you'd have 3 serves. Because right now I play doubles. Right, I throw the ball up and I kill it. It doesn't go in. Then I have my wuss follow-up serve. But if I ruled the world and you had 3 serves, the first one I'd go to kill it wouldn't go in. But then I learned from that. The second one I'd go to kill, and my serve would get better and better, and then I still have my follow-up was 3rd serve. All right. So, but it's a good example because people must understand that 2 serves versus 3 serves wasn't handed down from the heavens, right? Everything that is was put there by people. These are people who may be dissimilar from you or even similar to you, but who lived at a different time, who had different needs. Another example that I use in the book and in my classes, let's say you're an insurance company and you've got to decide whether people should be reimbursed for Cialis or Viagra. Okay, now you can imagine that they're going through very objective discussions. And so, to make the point clear, let's assume the people making this decision were 50-year-old lusty men versus a group of nuns. Okay, so stereotypes, would say that the lusty 50-year-old man would want to get reimbursed. The nuns, have little interest. All right, the point is it's always people who have created the world that we're living. Everything that was at one point a decision. If it was a decision, it means there was uncertainty. And so making the change shouldn't be as hard for people once they think of it, as it seems to be for many. Everything can be changed. I go into an ice cream store.
I love that you also...
I'm I'm on a roll now. I go into an ice cream store
Go for it.
and want 1 scoop of ice cream, but I want with 2 flavors. And the person who's doing this says, the only way you can have 2 flavors is to have 2 scoops. And then I engage in a discussion with the person. Why might that be? To my mind, the scooper can hold half, and then you put it in. Anyway, much of the time I'm able to get my 2 flavors with 1 scoop. Not always, but it does illustrate that somebody just made this decision, that, and there is uncertainty, and so it doesn't hurt to ask. All of the rules that we blindly follow were put there by people and should be challenged when they cause trouble for you.
You had a very interesting study of people asking to cut in line at the copy machine.
That was the
and
first.
just by, there was 3 groups.
Okay, you tell him.
Say again?
You can tell him.
Well, there was 3 sets of people. One just said, can I go in front of you? One said, can I go in front of you because I need to make copies? And the other said, can I go in front of you because I'm in a hurry? And just by having a qualifier on it, even though it's ridiculous, like, well, of course you need to make copies. But if you added that ridiculous qualifier, it resulted in people acquiescing so much more. I mean, it's just so crazy how our brains work.
Yeah. Well, I think that also highlights that people don't really listen. If you should give a because if you're asking somebody to do something for you. And so if you don't give that because, the rules we mindlessly follow are, I'm less likely to comply. But they don't really hear the reason, because to say, can I get in front of you because I need to make copies, is, somebody had told me way back when, because I did that study in the 70s, that somebody put an ad in the newspaper and said, send $1 to, and gave his address, and made like $25,000. Because, I guess people filled in the blanks, weren't thinking. And I had an example of that myself. I used to teach at the Graduate Center in Manhattan. And, 42nd Street, you walk by and there are all these stores that are going out of business for 40 years. They're going out of business. And in one of these stores, there was a sign, candles that burn. So I was going to go in and buy some candles that burn. And then I stopped myself, of course candles burn. So, but you see, they were using the script announcing something new. And so because I like new things, I didn't get as far as maybe some people who bought the candles. But yeah, it's all
and people who are in business to sell, who have a lot at stake, they know these things, and they are like, for instance, I love that in the book you talk about relative risk versus actual risk, or relative benefit versus actual benefit. I mean, it's just crazy how diverse the understanding to the recipient can be. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, if we go back to retail, people who are in the business are told if an item doesn't sell, raise the price rather than lower the price, because people mindlessly assume if it costs that much. And I did something with that with art, that if you put a heavy price tag, and if it's in a big gallery in a museum, or if you simply have it in for sale for a lot of money, people will then spend time looking at it, making a story about it, trying to appreciate it, because after all, somebody else has said this thing is worth that time. This is a wonderful painting, and and also that if you take sweaters or whatever that are not moving and you take them down from the shelves and put them on a table and mix them up so it looks like it's a sale, and people are more likely to buy them. Most of those things are not very costly, but the relative risk versus the absolute risk first came home to me with that initial nursing home study. I gave a talk and I said twice as many people had died in the tender loving care group than in we'll call them now the mindfulness group. Some smart person raised her hand, faculty person, and then asked, well, yes, but how many? Was it 1 versus 2? That's twice as many, right? 1 versus 2, which isn't the absolute, but not very meaningful. And in that study, the numbers were real. I think it was 7 out of 44 versus 13 out of 40, something like that. But at any rate, yeah. So when you're told that twice as many people have cancer now as last year, and it's a very special kind of cancer, you want to look at the absolute numbers. But yeah, I mean, I think that when I have that,
for example,
yeah. Well, I was just
medicine often talks about risk reduction for interventions, and you talked about I might not be pronouncing this person's name right, Gerd Geigenzer. He actually looked him up on where he talks about mammograms and how if you talk about the relative risk reduction, it can sound like you have 25% chance of survival, but when you look at the actual numbers, it's 1 in 1,000 over 10 years who's gotten a yearly mammogram gets those kind of benefits. So it's really life-changing to get specific about the numbers rather than be fooled by percentages.
Yes, for sure. But it also speaks to what the doctors don't know, because they tend to make the same statistical mistakes, and so you have to appreciate that medical people, they've gone through a lot of training, they're typically well-meaning and smart, but they don't know. Nobody knows. And so you need to partner in your own, not just turn yourself over to people.
I love that. Dr. Ellen, if you were to go back in time and be able to spend 5 minutes talking to yourself at age 10, what would you forewarn yourself?
Well, this is going to be a silly answer, but I'm going to give it nonetheless. So when I was a little kid, I remember not infrequently, but not every day or whatever, and this one person say to me, "Why are you smiling?" And I'd immediately remove the smile from my face. And I think that now, if someone were to say that to me, my response to them is, "Why aren't you smiling?" Right? So I would tell myself, most of this, that people don't know. It's okay not to know. And I think there's something else in the book that this is very important to me, but I don't know if in the short time we have, I can make it clear that, because it's also about numbers, that people are often given where they stand relative to other people on a normal distribution. It's a bell-shaped curve. basically the idea is whatever it's related to, some people, oh, they're terrible. Most people, okay. And then you have a few that are great. And the problem is that we think we're trapped in one of those not very good, okay, or great positions. And there are things that society does that reinforce that belief. Like, you have people whose memories are very good, and we call them super memorizers, super tasters, so super whatevers. And as soon as you do that, you're sort of saying the rest of us can't achieve that. And there's no data that could possibly speak to that. Second, that when you think something of yourself, so you're average, you want to say who decided what the criteria are. And then, but more important than all of this is the realization that everybody doesn't know something, everybody knows something else. And this came home to me in a very important way. We were having a large delivery in the house here. I was going to store all this furniture in the basement. And I, Genius Awards, look at all of that. I said, there's no way that that's going to fit there. The guy who was here, who was going to put it away, is somebody who would see himself as, not on top of things, not a successful person, a C or D student, so on and so forth, right? He sees himself, I think, as a loser. Nobody should. Okay. Anyway, he puts all of the furniture in the space, and not only that, but all of it was accessible. All right. It's not fair. I'm given all these awards, all this praise. I thought it couldn't be done. He, who thinks nothing of himself, figured out how to do it. And so then I wrote a little song from my grandkids to the tune of the old Sara Lee commercial. Everybody doesn't know something, but everyone knows something else. Everybody can't do something, but everyone can do something else. And when people are brought up to find the things that they can do, and feel good about themselves, then it's easy doing the thing. I sing. I love singing. I can't carry a tune. My friend says, I can carry a tune, just not very far. Okay, so I don't sing well. Well, why shouldn't I sing? It's fun, right? Okay, and so I can sing because I know of all these other things I can do. People need to be aware.
Well, the forest would be a very lonely place.
Yeah, really.
The forest would be a lonely place if only the best birds sang.
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of your time, but I have two questions I'm dying to know the answers to. What has been your greatest joy in doing this research over the last 45 years for you?
Well, it's interesting. Recently, I've been getting an enormous amount of email with everybody telling me the effects I've had on their lives, and that feels wonderful. I mean, ever since I was a little kid, I was more fortunate than most. I had parents who were so supportive. As I'm fond of saying, my mother would have had me laminated if she could have. Okay, so I grow up being very, very happy. And even as a little kid, you would say, oh, this or that. I said, well, why don't you look at it this way? To turn things around. And so I spent my whole life doing that. Each book that I write is maybe now more people, it feels that it's not fair because and maybe a way of understanding it is I see people, against the rail, and they keep scratching against the rail and unhappy when they think that they have to move a great distance, learn how to do their whole lives very differently. And all they have to do is very small little step, and then things can run smoothly. In book, that's, I've forgotten the question, but I'm having fun answering it anyway. What was the question?
What's been your biggest joy? And you're answering it beautifully. All the accolades and responses, and how much it's changed people's lives.
Yeah, feeling that I've made that difference and continue to do so is is very.
What's the best way for people to learn more about you, to stay in touch with you, to take the next steps in learning more about how they can positively empower their lives?
Well, probably by reading some of the books. The most recent one is called The Mindful Body, Thinking Our Way to Chronic Health. That has far more than we were able to, we weren't even able to touch the surface, as they say, of all the works in there. Ways of dealing with chronic illness with one's minds, and so on, all database. Then, it's like asking somebody, which of your children do you like best? And even if they do, they know they're not supposed to say so. But I think the mindfulness book, the first one, laid everything out. The next one was The Power of Mindful Learning. The names change because you can't keep writing a book with the same title, but they're all essentially books on mindfulness. I started to paint when I was 50 years old, and without knowing what I'm doing. And some of that is in the On Becoming an Artist book, which is not about being an artist. It was very funny. The book was called Mindful Creativity when I gave it to Random House. And then somebody there said, why don't we call it On Becoming an Artist? And I was so excited about somebody calling me an artist. I said, okay, that's great. But in the meantime, nobody realized it's a book about interpersonal mindfulness. And then there's the counterclockwise book. There's some repetition if you read all of them, but it's a repetition that will make you feel good rather than bored, because at first it's foreign and then becomes more and more familiar. So I guess I would say,
because being happy and empowered feels good.
Maybe start, because this is the one I'm most excited about at the moment, with the mindful body, and then go to the mindfulness.
Fantastic. Dr. Ellen Langer, it is a joy and a pleasure to meet you and share your work with the world. I love what you're doing to help people live more empowered, more awake, more mindful lives. Thank you so much for being here on Next Level Healing.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Tara.